There's something peculiar about happiness in music. Some people find it strange that artists
I
can
find
write
it really
cheerful
weird that
songs
people
when they're
could actually
feeling
write
joyful.
happy songs when they're happy.
RobertSmith has never been that kind of artist. He doesn't chase trends or worry about appearing fashionable. Instead, he simply feels. And for more than 45 years, people across multiple generations have found solace in his melancholy. His voice has become synonymous with beautiful sadness, and while there may be technically superior singers with cleaner vocal techniques, nobody captures raw emotional honesty quite like RobertSmith does. When it comes to expressing heartbreak, Smith makes it feel not just acceptable, but necessary. He was the outsider who made being different something to embrace rather than hide. As a goth icon, he paradoxically wrote some of the most perfect pop songs imaginable. During punk's heyday, when everyone demanded aggression and anger, Smith chose vulnerability instead. When the new wave movement went increasingly synthetic and electronic, he remained steadfastly emotional and human. Critics often dismissed him as depressing, but millions of fans discovered hope within his darkness. Behind all the dramatic makeup and theatrical performances lie songs that map out his entire artistic journey, tracks that remind him why music matters far more than image ever could. One man's refusal to conceal his feelings ended up giving voice to millions who felt the same way. If you're discovering RobertSmith's music for the first time or want to dive deeper into TheCure's catalog, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We explore the stories behind legendary artists and the songs that define generations. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into music history. Smith has considered which songs from his extensive catalog still move him after decades of performing them night after night. The architect of sadness has made his selections, and they reveal a heart that never closed itself off to feeling deeply. His choices tell the story of an artist who valued emotional truth above everything else. The song "Boys Don't Cry" stands as one of those rare debut statements that functions almost as autobiography. When it arrived in 1979, RobertSmith was barely 20 years old, yet he already understood that society's rigid rules about masculinity were essentially a prison. The song itself was simple, almost naive in its construction, but it was revolutionary in its honesty. Here was a man admitting he cried, that he felt too deeply, and that pretending not to feel hurt far worse than simply showing emotion. Smith has noted that TheCure has only played this song perhaps 3 times in the last 15 years or so, but it reminds him of being very young, of that particular innocence that exists before the world hardens you. The melody was surprisingly bright despite the sad message it conveyed, and that contrast made it work perfectly as pop music. Radio programmers didn't quite know what to make of a crying boy, but teenagers understood immediately. Finally, someone was saying what they actually felt. The recording was straightforward, without any studio tricks, just guitars, bass, drums, and Smith's voice occasionally cracking on certain lines. That imperfection made it feel real and authentic. Even in live performances decades later, Smith kept that youthful energy, still believing every word. For him, "Boys Don't Cry" represents permission to feel emotions fully, and it demonstrates how vulnerability actually connects people rather than isolating them. "A Forest" takes listeners to a different territory entirely. Some songs are merely dark, but this one is completely lost in darkness. Stretching past 5 minutes, it features a hypnotic bass line that repeats endlessly, while Smith describes running through trees that never end. The song functions as a nightmare made into music, capturing that terrifying feeling of being chased by something you cannot see or name. It gives anxiety a perfect form. The recording happened during what Smith calls the 17-second sessions, when the band was discovering their atmospheric sound. The bass line from Simon Gallup became iconic despite being simple, or perhaps because of it, as it proved impossible to forget. Smith's guitar added texture without dominating the soundscape. The entire composition feels like fog made audible, surrounding you until all sense of direction disappears. The song became their first significant hit, proving that dark music could reach mainstream audiences. Radio stations played it despite not fully understanding it, and listeners felt it without needing any explanation. That was when Smith realized TheCure could achieve success without compromising their artistic vision. For him, a forest represents atmosphere taking priority over rigid structure, showing how feeling beats explanation, and how getting lost sometimes means finding yourself. Primary arrived with a different kind of energy. Smith wrote it on bass, using a 6-string Fender to create the song's foundation. The rhythm drives forward relentlessly, while Smith sings about basic emotions stripped down to their core essence. Primary colors, primary feelings, everything reduced to absolute essentials. The song appeared on the album Faith, which marked TheCure's darkest period, but Primary possessed an energy that the rest of that album mostly avoided. That persistent pulse kept it moving when everything else stood still.
Smith's vocal performance sounds desperate, reaching for something just barely out of grasp. The production was deliberately sparse, letting the bass dominate, while drums and guitar provided support rather than leading. In live performances, the song becomes almost trance-like, with audiences locked into that rhythm and moving without conscious thought. Smith never grew tired of playing it because that bass line still excites him. The song proved TheCure could be dark without being slow and intense without being heavy. For Smith, Primary represents stripping everything away to reveal what actually matters, demonstrating how simplicity creates power when the underlying emotion is genuine. Pictures of You explores different emotional territory. The song came from Smith looking at photographs after experiencing loss, capturing that specific pain when memory becomes physical. Stretching past 7 minutes, it builds slowly and never rushes the emotion because every single word matters when everything hurts. Smith wrote it about specific photographs, those frozen moments that sometimes feel more real than the present moment. The production on the Disintegration album was deliberately lush, with layers of guitars creating a soundscape that felt infinite. The drums were huge and filled space with raw emotion. Smith's vocal was incredibly tender, with every line sung like a prayer or an apology. Smith has acknowledged it's essentially the love song on that album, though he adds that it's not really a love song in the traditional sense. The song became a fan favorite, with that perfect combination of beauty and sadness hitting listeners deeply. Wedding couples even chose it despite its melancholy tone, understanding that love always carries the potential for loss. Smith said it surprised him how strongly it connected with people, how his personal grief became a source of universal comfort. For him, Pictures of You represents how memory functions as both blessing and curse simultaneously, and how photographs both preserve precious moments and torture us with what we've lost. Plain Song starts massively, opening the Disintegration album with an absolute wall of sound. Guitars cascade like waterfalls, while drums announce something epic arriving. There's no singing for the first 2 minutes, just pure atmosphere building anticipation. When Smith's voice finally enters, it creates a sensation of both relief and intensification at the same time. The song addresses surrender, accepting that you cannot control everything in life. Smith's vocal is deliberately buried in the mix, one voice among many sounds. The production takes the opposite approach from minimalism, with everything layered until it becomes genuinely overwhelming, and that was completely intentional. The arrangement captures the feeling of being consumed by emotion too vast to process properly. Fans made it an anthem, with that opening creating instant recognition and excitement. Smith has said it still gives him chills when performing it, especially that moment when everything comes together perfectly. The song proved TheCure could create cinematic music that felt more like landscape than just individual songs. For Smith, Plain Song represents matching musical scale to emotional scale, showing how sometimes feelings require orchestral arrangements, even within rock music. Just Like Heaven takes a different approach by hiding sadness inside apparent sunshine. It stands as Smith's most perfect pop song, with deceptively upbeat music containing bittersweet lyrics about perfect moments you know cannot last. The title itself carries irony because in Smith's world, heaven is always temporary, but the melody expresses pure joy. That guitar riff proves impossible not to love. Smith has said everything meshed together perfectly, with one take capturing magic they could never quite recreate. The recording process actually surprised them because they expected to work much harder for that result. Sometimes songs simply arrive complete, refusing to be improved upon. The whole thing felt effortless, and that lightness makes the underlying melancholy hit even harder. Radio embraced it enthusiastically, giving TheCure its biggest hit up to that point. Critics finally admitted that Smith could write perfect pop songs without sacrificing depth or meaning. When Dinosaur Jr. covered it, their version actually influenced how TheCure played the song afterward. It proved that darkness and light are not opposites, but rather partners in creating complete emotional experiences. For Smith, Just Like Heaven represents perfect contradiction, demonstrating how the saddest songs sometimes need the brightest melodies to fully land. Love Song functions as pure declaration, written as a wedding gift for his wife Mary as their wedding approached. The lyrics are remarkably direct, with no metaphor hiding a simple statement of commitment. However far away, however long apart, however anything changes, love remains constant. That simplicity makes it devastating in its honesty. The production stripped away everything non-essential, letting the words dominate. Smith's vocal is tender and vulnerable without being weak. The rhythm stays steady like a heartbeat, reliable and constant. Nothing flashy appears, just honest declarations said to music that enhances without distracting from the message. The song became their biggest American hit, reaching #2 on the charts. Radio stations played it constantly, introducing TheCure to audiences who previously thought they were just a goth band. Smith actually performed it at his real wedding, and that moment made the song even more meaningful to him. Decades later, it remained true rather than becoming mere sentiment. For Smith, Love Song represents love without cynicism, showing how commitment ultimately means more than passion, and how the simplest words often work best. Disintegration functions more than just a title track. Stretching over 8 minutes, Smith documents emotional collapse in excruciating detail. The song is not metaphorical, but rather a clinical observation of depression's actual process, with everything falling apart slowly into pieces too small to gather back together. The production perfectly matches the theme, with sounds decaying throughout and structure loosening until nothing holds together firmly. Smith's vocal grows increasingly desperate, with that careful control slipping away with each successive verse. The keyboards create an atmosphere of dissolution, while guitars add texture to emptiness. Everything serves the concept perfectly. Smith has said the song captured a specific period in his life, that feeling of watching yourself disappear. Recording it proved emotionally difficult because it meant reliving those feelings to make it authentic, but the result justified the pain. It created a document that helped others recognize their own struggles. For Smith, disintegration represents naming the darkness directly, showing how documentation becomes a survival tool, and how the worst moments sometimes produce the most honest art when captured accurately.
End approaches its subject with stark acceptance. Closing the Wish album with finality, Smith documents goodbye without any drama, just a straightforward statement that everything concludes eventually, whether relationships, careers, or life itself. The song is not exactly sad, but rather resigned to inevitability, and that acceptance gives it power rather than making it depressing. The production was understated, proving TheCure could show restraint and that whispers sometimes communicate more powerfully than screams. Fans embraced it despite, or perhaps because of, its finality, as everyone faces endings eventually. Smith simply articulated what others felt but could not express themselves. Live performances became reverent occasions, with audiences remaining silent and respectful. Smith sang it like a benediction, offering blessing rather than curse. For him, end represents making peace with impermanence and understanding how accepting conclusions makes them bearable. Finally, Faith stands as the song Smith believes changed his life more than any other. Closing the album of the same name at 11 minutes long, it transforms despair into something beautiful. Smith has said he would never write anything that moves him as much or encapsulates a period of his life so completely. The song addresses losing faith in everything: God, people, yourself, the entire world. The production is deliberately skeletal, creating space where faith used to exist. Smith's vocals sounds exhausted, like someone who has cried until tears simply stop coming. The guitar work remains minimal, with notes chosen specifically for maximum emotional impact. Everything serves the emptiness at the song's core. Recording it proved both cathartic and devastating, as Smith poured genuine crisis into the music. The result was too honest for mainstream audiences, but connected deeply with those experiencing similar darkness. The song became TheCure's emotional heart, defining who they were beyond any other single track. For Smith, faith represents complete emotional exposure, demonstrating how the hardest songs sometimes save you and how documenting darkness proves you survived it. For RobertSmith, a song is not real unless it bleeds. These 10 songs represent different aspects of his journey: vulnerability, atmosphere, urgency, memory, scale, contradiction, commitment, dissolution, acceptance, and crisis. Each one captures a specific emotional truth that resonates with listeners experiencing their own darkness. The question remains, which Cure song speaks most powerfully to your own darkness?